They just county government sites, sometimes they do. They do a continuation budget.
It's all that they got concerned about tax rates. So.
Well, county is still continuing.
See that.
We used to do that too, because so much more money is spent.
Action said.
And then what I would like to do is if we can.
I appreciate everybody coming to the July 10th, 2024 meeting of the Transportation Coordinating Committee. I think we're one person short of a quorum here today.
Robert Johnson is coming. He's going to be a few minutes late, but he is on his way.
So we may be able to swing back through and adopt the minutes and everything once we get a quorum in place. But in the meantime, I don't see any reason we can't go ahead and do the informational items that we had at the end of the agenda, if everybody's all right with that. But before we get to that, let's see. Check the things off my list here. We have provided a hybrid option for those who aren't able to be here today. Any online participants to this meeting, please just communicate in the chat. And staff will attempt to type questions from the room into the chat since it'll be hard to hear. We won't be able to adopt the minutes until we get a quorum. So moving on to public comment. At this time, I'll open the floor to any member of the public who wishes to make a comment to the TCC. Please note that comments can also be emailed to comments@gnrc.org. So is there anybody from the public who wishes to make public comment? Okay, hearing none. If everybody's okay with it, what we'll do, we'll move the action items to the end of the agenda, and we'll move the informational items to the beginning of the meeting here. And
Mr. Chair.
yes,
Before we move on, if you would allow me, I'd like to introduce Mike Callis, who's the chair of our Transportation Policy Board. Mayor of White House is Portland with us today. I think he intends to begin joining us on a regular basis just to provide a little bit more connectivity between the Transportation Coordinating Committee and the Policy Board. Thank you, Mayor Callis, for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
sir. Thank you, Mayor Callis. Well, Lewis, tell me now that we do have a quorum, so let me back up here. I'm trying to wing this as best as I can, guys, so just bear with me. We'll go back up to the approval of the meeting minutes, if that's all right with everybody. In your packet, there were two sets of meeting minutes. There were minutes from the May 1, 2024 meeting and the June 6, 2024 meeting. Has everybody had a chance to look at those minutes that were in the packet? Were there any changes to either set of minutes? We can, what I'm going to do, if everybody's all right with it, we'll just do one vote on both sets of minutes. If everybody's okay with that. Were there any changes to either set of minutes need to be made? Just ma'am.
June 6th meeting, it showed that no one from Davidson County was present, and I was, but I came in late.
All right. Well, do we have a motion to approve or endorse the meeting minutes from May 1 and June 6 with the changes? Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the meeting minutes stand approved with the changes that were noted. I think we'll go ahead. If it's all right with everybody, we'll keep TDOT at the beginning of the agenda here, and we'll do those informational items first before we move on to the action items at the end. And so what we have on the agenda for informational items, we have folks from TDOT. Deputy Commissioner Preston Elliott is here with us today. We're honored to have him here to present information related to a request the state has made to the 4 largest MPOs to assist positioning Tennessee for additional federal transportation funds. And so with that, I'll turn that over to you, Mr. Preston.
Appreciate that. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. It feels a little bit like a welcoming home, so to speak. There's a lot of familiar, friendly faces. Hope they remain that way through this presentation. But as Josh has mentioned, this is a presentation that we're doing across the state to the large 4 MPOs, so those over 200,000 in population. And it's a topic I hope that you all have heard or have discussed as you've developed the Transportation Improvement Program and have looked at your projects and funding. Before I start with the presentation, I wanted to let you all know that you've probably heard the department talk about some reorganizations that we've been working on. You've heard probably terms such as EPIC and IPD. And so we finally solidified the Bureau of Planning, which is the bureau I oversee. And we've ended up with 5 divisions. A lot of those divisions are very familiar to you, planning being one of them, supporting the MPO and the RPO processes. But there are some changes within that I think that are very positive as it relates to the MPO process and the discussion that we'll have here today. So I just wanted to let you know that. One in particular change within the Bureau is the creation of a division called the Local Programs and Community Investments. That is, we're elevating our local programs program so that we can better support your communities. Better help you through the project development process on locally managed projects. And so within that, the director of that is Steve Allen. I'm sure it's a name that you've heard before. And that's somebody that really understands TDOT and can help navigate your projects. Again, this will really all come into play in this conversation, the discussion we're having. Another significant change within that organization creation is that we're putting engineers in local programs. That is something that we've never had before. And the goal there is to help facilitate and move projects through the project development process. So very positive things there. The second one, a change that I'd like to make is in planning. And I hope, again, this is a change that will facilitate a lot of improvements and efficiencies. And that is that the STIP development process will now be in planning. So we will have our planning and programming together. Which we hope helps in the dialogue and the development of your long-range plan and the management of your TIP. So those are 2 significant changes that we're making or have made to better support and advance projects locally and support the MPO process. So I just wanted to note those 2. The other changes, we have now have the strategic planning. It's strategic planning, research, and innovation. So the research program will be hosted there. Our strategic planning division used to be under admin, now moved over. The other division that we have is public transportation, rail, and freight. And so basically we're combining our multimodal and freight divisions back together again. Some of you that have observed the department over the years, they used to be together once before. We're bringing them back together to put a bigger focus in the multimodal component. And then the last change is that our Bureau now has aeronautics. So we now have planes, trains, and automobiles. So I think we've rounded out the marketplace on mobility, but we really hope to double down and invest more in our thinking and philosophy and planning in and around how we look at mobility. So thank you for that opportunity to set that stage, because I think it's going to become important as we talk about this topic here about federal funding and August redistribution. So thank you. So hopefully a lot of these acronyms are familiar to you. What really this topic today that I want to talk to you about is it's not a Tennessee problem. It's not an MPO problem. It's a national problem as it relates to the budgeting process and the funding process, and then how funds trickle down through an apportionment and an obligation at the national level. So starting from left to right, you know, the National Highway Performance Program, NHPP, SDBG, Surface Transportation Block Grant. You all are familiar with them. They probably have like SDBG-L or M or U, and then you may even see the SDBG-S, and that's the state one. So there's actually 5 pots of SDBG funds that come to the state. Yours are allocated in that urban over 200,000. We used to say the big 4, now we can say big 5 because Clarksville is now, as part of the 2020 census, is part of that over 200,000. In that category of urban, over 200,000 population, the MPOs in Tennessee that are over 200,000 receive $68 million. Okay, that's $68 million annually. That, at least that was the FY24 allocation. And that breaks out to roughly about 25 million, I think, is here in the Nashville urban population, urban SDBG funds. So what I would like to do, if you go to the next slide. So what happens at the national level is that while there's a apportionment at the federal level to control the budget, so to speak, they provide obligation limitations or obligation authority, meaning you can spend up to that line, but you don't really actually get all of your apportionment. And as you know, there's different pots of money. And so the apportionment is distributed across those different pots. So obviously the NHPP funds, it's much larger. I think in Tennessee, we receive over $500 million annually in NHPP funds. And so you can see how the obligation authority drops down. I'm going to use the next slide, if you could, Daniel, thank you, to kind of illustrate what we're talking about here, what the difference is between obligation and apportionment and so forth. So kind of think about it as like ponds, and there's a certain number of fish in that pond, but you're only given a license to fish for a certain number of fish in there. You can't fish more. So that's kind of that obligation and that apportionment being the number of fish, but the obligation being the limit, if that makes sense. So you can only fish it. So around this time of the year, nationally, FHWA provides information on unobligated funds, nationally, how much is available. Now, unobligated funds occur from a variety of standpoints. They occur from states that may not be able to obligate all of their funds. Some funds are harder to expend than others. TAP, CMAQ, carbon reduction, protect as examples. There are discretionary grants. You might win a grant, much like just recently did yesterday. That may take 2 years before they actually have a grant agreement in place. That's not obligated until they begin to start spending it on that project. So that's what we're talking about here. So if that number now nationally is $8.7 billion. So it's a very large number. I think 2 years ago it was probably around 4 billion. Four, yeah. Yeah, you can correct me if I say anything wrong.
No, you're saying.
Thank you. So if you go to the next slide, so as I mentioned in August, there's August redistribution, basically is an opportunity for each state to ask for additional obligation authority. You can't go over your apportionment, but you can ask for additional obligational authority. But those have to be obligated on projects that must spend that money or must obligate that money by September 30th. Of this year. So that happens every year. So that's why they call it August redistribution. FHWA has asked us to provide the list of projects that can obligate by that time period. In fact, they're asking us for that list next week. And so we've done this every year. We probably haven't had a conversation with you at the MPO level because historically we've only looked at the projects within the department that we can obligate up to our limitations. But in our state, the number on the urban STBG funds for the over 200,000 has grown substantially. In fact, it's the highest percentage base in the country. It's over 420 million, and it's not the MPO fault. It's not the municipality's fault. I'll explain how because of the complications in project development and how long things take, why it takes longer to obligate funds. So if we go to the next slide. So this is an example of what this August redistribution is. So they basically are giving us an additional, if we can catch more fish in the pond, so to speak, right? So we're getting additional license, additional authority to spend higher, but we don't get to fish all the fish. All right, so if we go to the next slide, please, thank you. So there are some, you've probably wondered like, hey, I look in the tip and I see AC funded. What does AC funded mean? So it's advanced construction. It's essentially, it's written in law that allows for states to indicate to the feds, hey, we are going to, at some point in time, ask for reimbursement of federal funds. Essentially, what we're doing is pre-financing. We're using state funds to advance a project. Why would we do that? Maybe we don't have enough obligational authority to do that, but the project is ready. There may be some specific reason that we need to obligate that project. Maybe we can't just do it phased out. And I think, in fact, there might be a project in the tip that illustrates that AC funding. So it's cash, it's a financial aspect here. And a lot of what I'm talking about is more about the financial management, not specifically to your projects. Your projects are your projects, and there are the priorities that you all establish. Really, this is about the fiscal management aspect of it. So if we go to the next slide. So when we're given that additional obligational authority, we can basically utilize more funds that are out there. It's not new money. So I just want to make sure everybody understands it's not new money. We're just basically being given the opportunity to spend it this fiscal year. Now, obligation authority rolls, or if I'm saying this correctly, so like if you didn't use last year's, yours rolls over. But in theory, it does time out. There are time limits on these funds. At the MPO level, you often don't see it because at the state level, we have the ability to cover that on projects. We spend the oldest money first. When the feds look at that top, the STBG, they just see a big number. They don't see the sub-allocated portion. So we have the ability to shield it, so to speak. There are times, TAP projects, there's also recreational trails where those which are harder to spend sometimes do time out, and we have to give those monies back. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so let me come back to August redistribution. So historically, TDOT has anywhere between $40 and $60 million annually that we've requested on additional obligation authority. Again, AC funded projects where we think we have enough money in those categories to ask for, we can do that. If you look in the middle part of this table here or slide, you'll see other states, South Carolina, Kentucky, North Carolina, they get about around 1 billion, 1.2 billion. We get about 1.2 billion of apportionment, apportionment annually. So we're very comparable to the top three. Virginia's a little larger at, I think 1.4, and Georgia's like 1.7. But you'll notice that they're drawing down significantly higher August redistribution. And we note that one of the communities, North Carolina, has employed what they're calling basically a fund swap program. They basically offer, if urban area allows the DOT to utilize their unobligated STBG funds, they repay back those STBG funds with what's called STBG flex, meaning we can spend it anywhere in the state. Your obligation that your urban funds can only be obligated within the MPO area. We can't take monies that are here and spend it in Memphis. Conversely, we can't spend money in Memphis. So these dollars have to be expended here. So that's why we're going to the big four. The number that's out there, as I mentioned, is around 420 million when you look at urban STBG for over 200,000. So Daniel, if you go to the next slide. So yeah, so I mentioned this to you that, roughly it's almost 6 years worth of apportionment that's available available for funding. And right now there's about 34 million unobligated funds in Chattanooga, 75 million in Knoxville, 100 million in Memphis, and 208 million. It may be plus or minus, but it's roughly about $200 million here. And so let me talk a little bit on the right side of this slide, because I think it's important. I've told Michael this before. I was really uncomfortable when the previous commissioner came in and talked to you all about you need to spend your money. You're sitting on money. We all know that's not true. You have programmed your projects. You have put them in the tip. The problem is that projects take time to develop. I suspect in Franklin, working through the right-of-way process is challenging. On Columbia Pike. I mean, just to think about that, just to where you are today, how long that took to get there. And so we recognize that the project development process, that's why we're staffing up back into the local programs and community investments so that we can assist you in that process. Over the years, it hasn't gotten easier, it's gotten more complex. I'll say it here, if FHWA will let me, we're going to blow up the LGG and retool it. And we're going to make it so that it meets the requirements of FHWA and doesn't try to mimic TDOT's process. What we needed to do is ensure that it meets federal requirements and all of the standards that are required from that, not mimic our process. So there will be, if you're on a state route, it may mimic it, but that may be because there's stewardship and oversight agreement requirements we have with FHWA. But the goal is to streamline the process so that we can help you get your projects developed. That's going to take more time than between now and August. So that's why we're having this conversation today. Let's see if, so if we go to the next slide. I mentioned about North Carolina and what they do. And so we've had, commissioners had conversations with MPS staff for Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and Chattanooga. I think we've met at least 3 or 4 times on conversations in the less than a month and a half. And so the strategy is really twofold. One is help you figure out the projects that you can obligate your funds, because that helps the state in obligating the dollars. And then the second is that employing this swap concept, which basically is a 1-for-1. There's no discounting commitment as soon as your dollars are needed. So if you need to obligate a project October 2nd, those funds are available. TDOT has more, or any state has more flexibility in how we move monies around from programs. You talked about NHPP. We have the ability to flex some programs. We have access to some state dollars. It's really our ability to move around these projects and advance them utilizing this. And I will say that there are quite a lot of safeguards in place. CFR specifically speaks to the components of the obligations in urban areas. And then also, as you know, you have the tip, and which you all are responsible for. And so there's a lot of safeguards in place. We've talked about establishing some sort of MOU to make this happen in terms of the swapping of dollars. And obviously the most important part is the tracking of that repayment. Now, this is not new to Tennessee. We've actually done this in 2013 in Knoxville. So we utilized their urban STVG funds and repaid them back. I'd say call Jeff Welch, but he's probably somewhere on an island or somewhere at the beach. But back then we did repay them. And I think that Matt and I were just in Knoxville yesterday, and they recognized that that was the case as well. Go to the next slide. So where does that additional obligation authority go? I kind of talked to you, it stays in your urban area. Talk to you again about the AC funding. So typically, if we had a project where we had AC funded, we would basically use the additional obligation authority to get the monies back. So basically it replenishes the pot that we have. In some cases, it actually translates into projects. There are 4 projects in this MPO area that could take advantage of utilization of your August redistribution. 3 of those projects are resurfacing. And the reason today we're not letting those projects is because we do not have enough obligational authority on our side to do so. If we were to offer those up with the utilization of your funds, we can make those resurfacings happen. Then let's say next year you need your money back, we repay you back. And that's how that works. And if you're curious, I can tell you the projects, but we can hold off to that because Michael may have some other things he wants to talk about. And yeah, thank you. Last one, I'll be quick. So there's this, why is this important? There's a couple factors here that we want to kind of to illustrate. One is the fact that, you know, I say we're leaving money on the table. You can see from other states, if our unobligated funds they're putting to use and pretty significantly in other states like North Carolina. We've all, you know, if you think about a project, it's going to be no cheaper today. That project you have only thing it's going to do is get more expensive over time. And so getting projects obligated utilizes the buying power today. The last part I want to talk about is this kind of risk factor. There's 2 parts here. One's a positive sort of, and one's a very negative. So the positive sort of is that we're hearing, and you know, it's great to get the discretionary grants, but what we're hearing is the more and more urban areas in a state are going after discretionary grants. We're getting word from FHWA and not here locally, just kind of around at the national level, that it's hard for the DOT to award big grants when they look at our books and they see, you know, 450 million sitting there unobligated. Now, I'd argue they're apples and oranges. They're not the same, but on their side, they kind of are saying, well, it's hard when we just look at that number. And we get that. So, you know, it's great that WeGo got that grant. We don't want anyone not to get a discretionary grant. And so, you know, Nashville in this area is not the only ones going after grants. And we've been quite successful, actually. Just a quick highlight on that. Since 2020, well, actually, since the passage of IIJA, Tennessee has received almost $300 million in discretionary grants across the state. About 100 million or so goes to transit agencies, about 125 million to cities and counties, and the remaining 75 million have been projects for which TDOT. So it's a lot of money that's out there. We've got an ask right now for I-55 over the Mississippi, and if we're successful, that will be nearly $500 million. So that's money, new monies to our state, in addition, over and above the discretionary. So that's kind of the good side. Now the bad, the Delphi themas. So the federal accounting system for all of federal government is Delphi. You all probably heard about FEMAS. FEMAS is what FHWA uses to track the accounting aspects. There's a discrepancy between those two books or those two systems, and it's pretty significant. At one point, I think it was near 8 billion or 6 billion. Now it's down to about $1 billion. Is that right?
1.3.
1.3 billion. So the issue is, and we don't want to find ourselves there, but if you have $1.3 billion discrepancy and they need to rectify the books, and you're a state that has a high unobligated balance, unobligated funds, we probably will be ones that they'll be looking at a higher percentage. And so it behooves us as a state to reduce or minimize our risk, and utilizing funds that we have today is a good way of reducing that risk. So I've said a lot. Michael, I don't know if you or Josh or Daniel, however you would like to proceed with further discussion.
But we could, if anybody has questions for Deputy Commissioner Elliott, we could do that now, or we could let, Michael could go ahead and give his presentation. We could have a Q&A after that. However y'all want to do it's fine. Michael, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. Any immediate reaction to the request from TDOT before I get into what staff is looking at and what our recommendation will be to the Transportation Policy Board next week?
We'll just mention, that was very well explained. I was able to follow that exactly what you were talking about. So I appreciate the detail that you provided. That's
The
helpful.
fishing analogy from TDOT or Federal Highway? Federal Highway typically uses M&Ms.
Yeah. Not that I have any peanut allergy in this.
I will say that I certainly, I would think that most people would agree with me. No one wants to see the state or as a Tennessean lose any funding, regardless of where that goes throughout the state. I think the concern would be here is that we also don't want to lose funding locally for our projects that may have taken years to go through the process. And I'll be selfish for a second and be the local example of McEwen Drive. That if we were to trade off funding for McEwen Drive, which we're just kind of right very close to the cusp of being able to get to that obligation authority. If we trade that off and then there's a time frame lapse, of several months or whatever it takes to get to that point, those are the kind of things I think about in the back of my head.
Yeah, and I think Michael's going to speak to avoiding the risks and the deep analysis they've done on that.
But I think the big thing is, like I said, I think it makes sense to not. We've heard for years that we're one of the lowest ones on the list, and I think at one point I heard we were like number 51. We were behind Puerto Rico at obligating. So it's like that.
Yeah, I didn't. So it's flipped. Like we're the worst one on the list, and West Virginia is behind us. Like so, we're
okay.
worse
Yeah, like we were. There was a list of like 52, I think, when we were 51, I believe.
Yes. Yeah. We are.
So, and we don't want to be that. I get it. So you don't want to become a donor state when it comes to transportation funds. That's what you don't want to be.
Well, rankings are about perspective. You could also be first at not obligating money.
Yeah.
Well,
We don't want to be first there either. You don't want to be first loser. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Robert Johnson, I'd certainly echo the others there, Preston. That was a great explanation. I've not heard anything about this topic before, and you explained it completely. So, proviso, I have not heard anything about this topic before. Yes, I'd agree. There's a balance between the issue of we certainly think your motives are good, and we certainly think that the justification, everything you've explained is excellent and probably also, supports proceeding. But as Jonathan says, one thing we do know is that we don't want clerical processes or the paperwork to suddenly result in additional delay. And even if it is only months or only going through another office or only rectifying it with a different computer system, that could be very significant for some people. So I don't know if you're going to address that, Michael, but yeah, in terms of the risk, totally support the motives and the reasons for everything that you've said, concerned about the actual practicality.
Especially when we talk about cost delay, especially over the last few years, it used to not be a huge issue, but months can make several $1 million worth of difference in a large project now. And if it's a one-to-one cost swap, that may make a huge difference if there's a delay.
Jonathan, Robert, appreciate expressing your concern. You're not fulfilling your role as a member of this committee if you're not coming to the table somewhat skeptical of proposals like this. But I think and what we have prepared as staff, we've done a good job developing a recommendation that I think will balance the needs here. Jim?
Well, I was just gonna ask, we've got several projects that are just right on the cusp of getting obligated, and can we get from TDOT a obligation that we can get prioritization maybe, or?
Yeah, I think Michael's gonna, literally, your staff has done, I think, everything that you're asking here. Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and get into the material. I hate to read to you, but I think what we have prepared that's currently included in the packet and generally summarized on the screen says what we need to say out loud today to get your reaction before we go to the Transportation Policy Board next week. But I am looking at the handout in the packet under agenda item 4B. Opening paragraph here essentially restates the request from TDOT to the large NPOs that help position the state for a good outcome with the August redistribution. Specifically, the request of us was to try to identify $135 million in federal funds and the current tip on locally managed projects that could be essentially obligated by the end of this fiscal year. And so what we're going to do is show you how we have not only gotten to that number, but exceeded that request to the tune of about $13 million. So we've identified about $148 million that staff would be comfortable recommending to the policy board as either being money that we would obligate on our projects as is in the current tip, or provided to TDOT to obligate on state managed projects in our region. So that's the bottom line here. But let me go through this. And so just to restate a few things via the staff analysis, as Preston mentioned, even though we get an annual apportionment, we get an allocation or sub-allocation of particular federal grant programs, there's an obligation limitation each year and only so much obligation authority. This is a cash flow management objective at the federal level. To ensure maximum use of federal funds appropriated by Congress, Federal Highway seeks to redistribute the obligation authority each year, transferring or flexing the obligation authority associated with federal highway funding. I shouldn't say the obligation authority, but the actual grant allocations themselves between the states and their NPOs is seen as a best practice. And Preston has given a couple of examples of where that has been successful. North Carolina, generally, and then also specifically the instance in Tennessee with Knoxville. Our NPO is also previously actually in a reverse proposal proposed to the state to swap out funding. I could think of a project in Franklin. I think we were trying to swap out SDBG funds from the urban area that were allocated to one of your projects to the state's Mac Hatcher project. So there are a couple of examples where we have made this proposal to the state over the course of the last few years. Tennessee NPOs have a large balance of allocated federal highway grant funds. Preston mentioned, I think, $420 million across the large four NPOs or the TMA NPOs. $217 million of that is attributed to the National Davidson UZA SDBG funds. And then sort of the bottom line here is that we agree that reducing the unobligated balances will demonstrate a greater need from the federal government as it determines how to redistribute the obligation authority across the nation through the August redistribution process. And then the other thing that Preston ended on here is that it does, I think we also agree, in some cases will increase competitiveness for discretionary funding. The more you can demonstrate the need for the funding because you have no other option, the greater chance with some of these discretionary grants, which if you're not familiar with, you get more information from the DOT Navigator and the Federal Highway discretionary grant dashboard, which is actually hyperlinked to the PDF version of this document. So the staff recommendation, and I'll get into the details here in a minute in terms of how we arrived at the $148 million, but we have identified that amount of money in obligated federal grants currently programmed in the TIP on locally managed projects. And this is how we're making the distinction in how the money is being used. There's locally managed projects that you all are implementing either in-house or through contractors, and then there's the projects that the state is managing or implementing. All projects that we're talking about, though, are located within our 7-county area and included in the TIP, or would need to be included in the TIP before they could be moved forward. Of the $148 million that we've identified, $52.8 million of that is on locally managed projects programmed with urban STBG already in the TIP that we think can get obligated by September 30th, which that deadline is actually probably September 20th-ish, a little bit before 9:30.
Yes, it has to be put in famous, I think, the 2nd or 23rd, I think is what y'all were asking.
Yeah, I have to double check with our finance.
There's a little bit of, it's 9:30 actually happens earlier because the books have to shut
Correct.
down for the switch over of the fiscal years. So $52.8 million on your projects with USTBG funds that through some assistance from the department over the last several weeks, we've been able to overcome some obstacles to allow these projects to get to obligation. So I appreciate you, Preston, and Matt, his team, and Taylor and Shay and Daniel for working through some very specific challenges with some of those projects. Those projects are identified in List A, and I'll come to the lists here in a minute. The second grouping of projects that allow us to get to the 148 is that there is $18.6 million in other federal grants on locally managed projects that are part of the list of projects that we think can get obligated before the end of the fiscal year. So all told, we're looking at was at about 70, actually the sum of List A, which is just shy of $71.5 million that we think can get obligated before the end of the year. So that doesn't require any sort of swapping, but it helps us get to that $135 million target that the state had asked us to achieve. So let's go ahead and reference the lists. I know lists make people either very happy or very sad. If you're on List A, you should be very happy. There's optimism that these projects are going to get obligated. If you're on lists B or C, you should just be neutral because the lists are about the accounting of our funds, not about you or your project losing money because of a swap. It's just how we're arriving at the $148 million. Because what TDOT will put in writing is that if your project is ready to obligate federal funds, it's going to get obligated, no matter what we have swapped out. So just keep that in the back of your mind. This is more about accounting for the amount of money that we're providing to the state to obligate on state managed projects within our region so we can get it back when we're ready to obligate our locally managed projects. Okay. So we'll go back to the handout and the bullet points. And then so we've talked about the $52.8 million in STBG funds, the $18.6 million in from other federal grants that are already in the TIP on locally managed projects. But then we also assessed all the projects in the TIP. Staff had reached out to each of you to understand the latest in terms of the status of your projects. And then we determined the likelihood of obligation of your projects or the funds on your projects through fiscal year 2025. And then what we thought would be obligated at 2026 or later. So list B is the list of projects that we don't anticipate being obligated before the end of fiscal year 2025. So these are 2026 and beyond projects. Again, if your project's on that list, don't worry. If you accelerate over those timelines and are ready to obligate tomorrow, you're going to be able to do that. But it's an accounting of how we're arriving at the amount of money we're willing to swap out with the state. Right. And then list C represents the projects that we anticipate obligating in the coming fiscal year. And that's out of order temporally, but the reason is because lists A and B are together how we get to the $148 million. And then list C is essentially what we don't want to swap out so that if there are unexpected circumstances with the repayment schedule and some of the concerns that you address, we have $86 million in funding on hand to be able to meet our programming lowercase o obligations to you all to move forward with your project. So list C represents those projects whereby through your input, we were able to determine have a high chance of likelihood of obligation in the coming fiscal year. Any questions about the three lists before I move on and sort of round out our recommendations to the board? All right, so then the final primary bullet here that starts, staff recommends that the TBB take the following actions at its meeting next week. One is to adopt the proposed amendments to the TIP that we're about to present to you. Some of these amendments relate to changes that need to occur to facilitate the timely obligation of funds within this fiscal year. So your recommendation on those TIP actions would be much appreciated today as we get those in front of the board next week. And then the other thing that we're recommending to the board is to essentially authorize us to work with TDOT on the swapping out of funds, which is largely an administrative task that will happen behind the scenes. Our staff will be responsible for keeping a good account of the dollars that are going over to the state to be obligated on state managed projects within our region. And we have a process to do that through our current databases. But we're essentially asking the state or the board to authorize us to coordinate with TDOT and swapping out that money, but subject to a couple of conditions. One is that they put into writing information pertaining to the timeline and process for repayment of the funds from the STP Flex that Preston mentioned. And then also an acknowledgement, Preston's already said this out loud, but an acknowledgement essentially that when we get the STBG Flex, that it doesn't come with any additional strings attached beyond those that are already part of the AO process. And so it's a recognition that these were originally suballocated dollars. The Transportation Policy Board has discretion within the CFRs, how these can be used. And so we want the state to acknowledge that they're not going to introduce any additional discretion in how we use the STBG Flex that comes back to us in the form of repayment. So any questions about what staff has proposed or how we arrive at the $148 million? And then also that we're retaining $86 million of our sub-allocated STBG funds just in case.
Well, I'm curious, Preston mentioned that the funds that would be swapped would be used for projects within our region. I think he said there were 3 major projects and someone might be curious as to what those were. I'm curious.
Yeah, we actually have the ability to obligate what I'm about to share with you, regardless of the 71 million, another basically 136 million ourselves. And those projects, there's about $64 million that were AC funded projects. So let me try to give an example of a project that was AC funded.
Sorry, you'll have to explain some of these acronyms.
Yeah, advanced construction. Again, that's where we pre-financed. We use state funds with the indication to the FHWA in the future. We will be asking for repayment. We don't. Why I'm being a little long-winded on this answer is we don't necessarily have to do the conversion. We could introduce these projects that are consistent with your TIP and do those, and at some other time in the future ask for repayment on the AC funded. So it's not as if there's not a time limit, so to speak, on the AC. So like, for example, we did the I-65 interchange in Murray County, State Route 99. We AC funded that project, advanced constructed. It was $21.1 million. We would, if we had access to the 71 million, we would basically just go to FHWA and say, we're requesting that payment back. Okay. So there's $64.2 million worth of projects there. The other list we have is another $71 million in projects. Now, these would be projects that we could obligate this fiscal year. If we don't, we will be obligating them next fiscal year. 3 of them are resurfacing projects. And again, it's just because we do not have the money in hand today without that additional obligational authority. I-65 near State Route 106 to south at State Route 248. So that's in Williamson County. I-65 Murray County line to near State Route 106. Those are 2 resurfacing projects on the interstate. And then also a resurfacing project in Murray, which is the State Route 6 bypass near the bridge over Williamport Pike, State Route 7. These are ones that we had in our resurfacing program, but because we didn't have the funds this fiscal year, we'll bump them to next fiscal year. If we have the additional obligational authority, we would obligate these projects. The other project is in Rutherford, State Route 99. It's west of Veterans Parkway to Cason Lane in Murfreesboro, and that's about a $59.2 million project. And so again, if we had access, those are the types of projects. If it's limited to the 71 or 73, whatever the number you came up with, we would either AC fund or do those projects. I have not got confirmation internally what ones we would elect to do. I suspect you always say you want the projects rather than us AC funding because we're just paying back the kitty. But if I don't know the answer to that question at this moment, but That help?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And I'll just underscore one more thing about why this is important beyond August redistribution. And because when you've got $217 million of unobligated funding sitting out there, that's subject to rescission. These things can happen at any given time. We've had more than a few rescissions in my time working with the MPO since 2007. One horrible one back in 2009 that eventually got restored, but we took a year trying to decide which projects to remove from the TIP. So once the money gets obligated, you're protected from those actions. So it's better for the state to be obligating that money on state managed projects in our region than for us to sit there exposing it to the risk of rescission, which to me is the greatest risk that we can talk about. That's a greater risk, I think, than worrying about whether or not TDOT's going to be able to repay through the STBG Flex program. But we want them to put in writing how that's going to work, and so that we can hold each other accountable to the process. Any other questions?
Does this change the way project cost inflation on unobligated projects, on projects that are hanging out there? Does this change the way cost inflation is dealt with or can be handled? I know a little bit about the TIP process, but yeah, I guess that's my question.
What the MPO staff has done is a very detailed analysis, which helps you understand your risk project at a project level. The money, it's a financial component. How you spend your money, what you spend your money on, that doesn't change. So if you have cost overruns on your project, and that's part of the TIP process that you reflect, that's just how you use your money. We repay you back what you need to obligate based on how much we owe, right? So if we borrow 50, we pay you back 50. How you spend the 50 is up to the MPO, you member jurisdictions MPO.
Well, I'd say,
Let me take a step backwards on that one. Is I don't know whether the acronym is going to change in the TIP, and does the change in the acronym in the TIP make it different the way we deal with cost inflation? I'm talking before obligation. Does it change that?
so if you're on list B, right, so this is where you're likely at 26 or beyond obligation, you'll still see USTBG or URSV in the TIP. Is that what you're referring to?
Okay.
You'll still see that code, but in our database, we have the ability to put trailing letters. And so we'll just put flex behind that. So we know how to keep track of the money, but it's the same, essentially, that you're going to still get an STBG grant to do the project.
Right. So
The TIP process is still the same, and the way that we would deal with cost overruns is still the same.
I think right. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's the answer.
Goal for all of us is that it's a table in the back that is just a plus and minus, and how you've done it on the page is the way it is. We'll obviously have to work with FHWA to ensure that. You all may or may not know this, but there's probably 12 different code numbers that go into FEMAS that relate to STBG. You don't see all 12 of those codes in your TIP. It's all on the backside. So whatever we can do that does not cause that kind of nightmare, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, so Robert's question about inflation, though, I think that there is a positive here, because the quicker that TDOT can get projects moving on their side, the more money the rest of us are going to have for projects in our community.
Correct.
So when they're waiting on funding or obligation authority, they're potentially risking the price tag of those projects, which requires more money to be pulled from whatever sources of funding that they're using for their cost share of your projects. The TIP, the only impact to the TIP that we may have is if the state chooses to obligate funds on a state managed project that isn't appropriately in the TIP. And we might occasionally have to process an amendment. The ones that you've identified are part of groupings that are already included in the TIP.
Right. Yeah.
And then the other thing I would point out is that I think, and we haven't really talked about this, but this isn't really intended to be a one-time swap. What we're going to be asking the TPP to do is to essentially authorize this as a program. So throughout the year, we have the ability to do this as well. And this is, right now, it's going to just be easier to get this money on 3R projects because that's easy to obligate and they're ready to go. But, if there are other, capital expansion projects within the region and TDOT needs some assistance from a funding standpoint, then us basically swapping out our urban STBG can help move those projects.
I think that this really begins to plant a seed. There are 16 states that have a funds swap program in place. This one, we're just talking about federal. In other states, which I think you're aware of it, Michael, is they do an exchange on a federal and state. You get state funds for federal funds. They're different, but this could open that kind of concept and discussion. Why is that important? Non-federal projects tend to move faster than federal funded projects.
I mean, that's a conversation we probably would have with the committee. One I had with Commissioner Schroer before his departure from the state. And that's a situation where, just to maybe foreshadow, you may be willing to take a lower rate of return, right?
Yeah,
You might swap out federal
yeah.
dollar for 80-cent state money if you can get through that project a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of creativity.
I'm not proposing that now. That's for more discussion.
So, any other questions about staff's recommendation?
One more, I'm sorry, and as I'm saying this is probably sort of a straw man theory, conspiracy theory, but not really, but it could be more theoretical than practical. Is the flex just one way, or would it be like a?
And that's, I think, the conversation that this plants that seed.
Okay.
I think as if this works as we all hope that it works, I'm pretty confident it will, then I think that's the next conversation, right?
Okay.
How does that work? How does that look like for us helping advance projects in communities?
Speak on just because I've been working with Daniel the last 3 weeks with what's eligible for STBG funding. And some transit projects are not eligible for STBG funds. So I'm looking at this from a programmatic standpoint, saying, okay, maybe we can flex a different pot of money rather than the STBG. Transit needs the CMAQ dollars, so that this is an ongoing part of how we balance.
And that's, yeah,
Transportation
I'm
program.
glad you brought that up, Billy. So if you've noticed quite over the last several years of CMAQ funds to transit, because that is a strategy to help obligate dollars, moving them from CMAQ to FTA, and then that helps reduce that, because on the CMAQ, oftentimes those are harder projects to spend, or their eligibility component. So we've done that as a strategy across the state.
And I'll add one thing. I think this process has allowed staff to implement a lot of the project delivery task force recommendations that you may have seen, like, working with TDOT on specific communication issues that we might have either with local programs or programming or different offices at TDOT, and allowed Taylor to really step in and communicate with all of our locals, including you all, on specific issues that you're experiencing on your projects that might result in delays. And so this has really been a good exercise for us to actually implement some of those recommendations and speed up obligation on projects in that list A, and that we're hoping will continue even past this activity into the future.
This was done in Knoxville. I remember something about that years ago. What was the project? How did that work?
It was in 2013. I believe it was, I forget the state route specifically, but it was on a single project. And so we utilized and paid back. And that's why the accounting exercise is very important on the payback, because, TDOT can take one project and pretty much, in this case here, 7 projects and hit 136 million. You see how many pages that you had to go through to get to the 71. So the repayment's going to be slower. It's not because we're repaying you slow. Projects move along the process at a certain pace. And so until you get to the construction, you're not going to have that big hit. Because you'll notice a lot of these in here, if they're PE and so forth. I do have the information, Josh, on Knoxville, but it was at that time, but we'll do a formal, but in Knoxville, it was a letter. And that was all.
And so what's anticipated here is a formal agreement between TDOT and the DPP, right? Yeah, okay.
Talk about the AC funding method. Can cities leverage that, or is it just a state thing?
So we haven't done that. But that's a good question about the ability for that to occur. I think it's everything about risk, and repayment, but, it could be. I don't think there's any limitation. Yeah.
Not to interrupt, I know that there's only local program experience. There's only one project that we did that. It was as a severe, I believe, but it's in STIP.
They're not.
Yeah. They weren't an MPO, so it didn't go through the MPO process, went to the STIP amendment process, but they did do, I think it was AC CMAC, which is not something you see often. So they did have there was, I don't know, like I said, it was kind of a more of a one-time thing to my knowledge for local programs, but we have done it at least once in the past. They at least done it once in the past.
Well, the risk is to the local government more than anybody else. I don't think there's a federal prohibition on.
If you don't have enough funding on a project that's already going through the federal process and you're coming out with local funding, then
And that probably is not advantageous for you because you're fronting the money to get paid back. So I don't know why you'd necessarily do that. But I mean, if it was an advantage, you could, but you're still going to be obligated to do all the federal requirements. It doesn't, yeah.
When you get the project done, you do a bond issue, then pay yourself back.
The interest, I guess the inflation over time value.
It was State Route 33 and it was about 19.8 million.
I remember that was held up years ago as something that TDOT wanted to do a lot more of, so.
And I'll add one thing. I know Michael is probably actually going to touch on this in a little bit is, we have the list of fiscal year 26. That's only about 14 months away, I think, starting. So that list, fiscal year 26, you think that's just 10/1/25. So that's a lot closer and those lists are not going to be set in stone of like, you can't, once we do this, some projects are going to go delayed, some are going to get ahead of time. So I think that's important to note as well.
As soon as the ask is in for your repayment is to repay without delay.
Yeah, look forward to seeing that in writing. Well, Mr. Chair, that's all we had this morning. I do want to encourage you to talk with the voting member from your community, sits on the Transportation Policy Board, probably your mayor, county executives, and make sure they are aware of what we will have for them next week. We'll also be doing our outreach, but could use your help making sure everybody's aware of the situation, because this sort of is a quicker process than we probably would have liked to do something this significant. But we feel comfortable as staff making the recommendations next week.
Do we want to take a position of support that would go to the TPC?
We have it on here as a informational item. I'd defer to the staff if you guys want to endorse this. I would second what Michael said. I think this is about as complicated of a topic as I deal with anyway. And so talking to your mayors about this stuff, giving them a heads up on it ahead of time is probably a good idea. Because I think there's ample opportunity for people to feel like they're going to lose something here. And I don't think that's TDOT's intent. But if there's a motion to endorse this proposal, I mean, granted, there's a written agreement that's going to come out of this that we haven't seen yet. But if we're endorsing this in concept, if everybody's okay with that, then I'd ask for somebody to make a motion to that effect.
Moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we had a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anybody opposed? All right, hearing none, that was a unanimous motion to endorse. Well, that's all for TDOT and for Mr. Skipper. Did you guys have anything at all else you wanted to add before we move on to the action items? I did want to recognize we had a TDOT's planning director. Is it Matt Missouri? Is that your name? Missouri, I think. You have to go to the TPP meetings to get that joke. But thanks for coming, Matt. Moving on to the action items. Let me get my bearings back again. At this time, we'll move on to action item A, which is amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program. Shay Northfield, GNRC TIP Coordinator, I'll turn it over to you for the staff presentation on this.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. So just as a overview of the TIP, it's a short-term work program that covers 4 years with all regionally significant and federally funded transportation projects in our MPO planning area. It must be consistent with the regional transportation plan and must be fiscally constrained. The current TIP is fiscal years 2023 to 2026, which was adopted in November 2022, and accounts for approximately $1.7 billion. And you can access a map at gnrc.org/TIP to see all of the projects. So there are 7 amendments today, adding about $23.5 million in federal funds, with near 11 million of that being programming reserve funding. And 4 of the amendments today are a part of the MPO's proposed approach to August redistribution that was discussed earlier. So first up, we have Spring Hill's Jim Warren Road Bridge over I-65. This amendment adds the project to the TIP and adds about $60 million in local funds to the fiscal year 2024 NEPA design and construction phases. Next is Hendersonville's Walton Ferry and Old Shackle Island Road Improvements Project. This adds about 2.5 million in federal US TBG funds for fiscal year 2024 construction phase from the reserve funding, and 800,000 about in local funds for the fiscal year 2024 construction phase. Next is Franklin's McEwen Drive widening phase 4. This adds near $7.8 million in federal US CBG funds for the fiscal year 2024 construction phase from reserve funding. Next is TDOT's I-65 widening from Rivergate Parkway to near Blue Star Road US 31W. This adds about $130 million in the advanced construction NHPP, so the AC funds provided to the project by the Transportation Modernization Act for the fiscal year 2025 construction phase. So these are state funds that will later be converted to federal NHPP funds. This also swaps out about $30 million in NHPP funds from fiscal year 2025 construction phase and updates the total project cost.
Shay, is this related in any way to what we just talked about as far as transferring obligation authority and stuff like that? Or is this something totally separate from that?
This project, no.
Yeah.
This is a 10-year plan project.
So next is Hendersonville's closed loop and signal upgrade. This adds about $400,000 in federal USTBG funds for fiscal year 2024 construction from reserve funding. Next is Franklin's ITS infrastructure. This adds near $200,000 in federal USCBG funds for the fiscal year 2024 construction phase from reserve funding. And lastly is RTA's Donaldson Station Transit Center. This amendment adds the project to the TIP with $3 million in federal FTA community project funding, CPF funds, provided through a discretionary grant from FTA from congressionally directed spending for a community project for the fiscal year 2024 implementation phase. And we do have an update to this project. We are adding additional funding to this as well. That will be updated in the version that goes to TBB next week. And I'm just going to pass it over to Billy to quickly talk about
Yes,
that.
we were notified yesterday that FTA has awarded additional $10 million in federal funding for this project with a $2.5 million loan.
So that in total adds $13 million in federal funds to this project. And those are all the amendments that we have. So I will pass it back to the chair for any questions.
Have any questions for staff?
Sir, one question and a comment. So the comments on McEwen Drive, I still owe staff an update on the pricing. I have a second set of eyes. My boss looking at those numbers right now. So that'll change the local number a little bit, probably go up a little bit on the local number. And I'll get you that hopefully tomorrow, most likely. And the second one, my question is just on the Spring Hill amendment. What is that bridge proposed to connect to? I mean, I'm very familiar with the area living in Spring Hill, and Jim Warren Road doesn't, I mean, it connects, there's nothing there.
So it connects to, I believe, the Saturn Parkway interchange. And I don't know if is anyone here from Spring Hill today? But
No, I actually might know a little bit.
okay.
Could you click on it so I can just make sure I'm speaking to the right place?
I mean, I know where they built the development near Saturn Parkway, but
Before I speak incorrectly, I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right one. Okay, so this project, this, they are seeking a federal grant. It's a bridge replacement project.
It's a very old bridge.
And so, just for everyone's knowledge, if you were to want to get a pin for TDOT to be able to begin to review, let's say the NEPA or it has to be in the tip.
Yeah.
And so even though that they're funding it locally and because they're going after discretionary grants, that's why they're making this request to be put in the tip. There's no, as you can see, there's no MPO or no state funding. It's,
That's why I assumed it was in the request.
there's a development, I believe, in that vicinity on.
It's a big commercial development right next to it.
I don't think that the BIP, the Bridge Investment Program for 24 has been announced. I don't think so.
No, very soon though.
So I think they're going after.
The reason I asked that road is less than rural at this point.
And there are likely going to be subsequent projects on the actual roadway itself. But this is just the bridge replacement.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I figured that the 15 would only.
Because
cover bridge.
there's a lot of different things that are gonna have to happen for the subsequent projects, like functional class change, but
Absolutely.
we're not worried about that.
Okay.
Feedback on Preston as well, saying that you need to get a PIN number as being the tip. Also, for you to actually start the NEPA process, you have to have a tip page and a PIN number. So like having that NEPA document done, even if it takes the process, as we all know, the length of time, having that as part of an application, because usually you'll have roughly about 30% plans as well with that NEPA document. Having that to go with a request or application for federal funds is going to go a long way. So I think that's kind of the NEPA process as well, being able to start that instead of waiting for federal funds to be added.
And that's actually very good to hear now, because I know in years past, that was very hard to get figured out because we would want to go for federal funding and what we heard back was, well, if it doesn't have federal funding, we're not going to review it. And well, if we're going to ask for federal funding, we won't have time to get through the development process. So it was kind of a chicken or the egg kind of conversation. So I'm glad that's finally gotten figured out. So thank you very much for that.
And I'll just reiterate what Shay said, the 4 projects that are programming reserve, that's really just a good result of this whole situation with obligation authority is us being able to say, we know that these projects are very close to obligation, like Jim was stating about his projects, as well as the McEwen project. We know they're close to obligation and programming reserve to, deal with inflationary pressures and other issues that the project allows us to obligate before the end of fiscal year 24 and essentially protect your project from having to do anything else besides just obligating the funding on it and moving it forward. So
I think a lot of the places, especially we're talking about the flex funding, I think any projects where we're showing the construction funding in reserve, I think that does give a lot of opportunities for flexing that funding in the future. Because those are the projects where we'll be in NEPA or we'll be in design or right of way, and you're several years off. So you're going to repay those funds well into the future.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm very supportive of all these tip amendments. But I had a question about the project, the Walton Ferry and Old Shackle Island project. Maybe GNRC or TDOT could address it, just on how this overlaps with what we were talking about with the August redistribution. Because I think like timing wise, if I had the right information, I think timing wise, because we're recommending it today and then next week, the Bold Policy Board is going to be adopting it. I think that was going to delay, TDOT's bidding or something of it. And I didn't know if with what we're doing now, with what we're talking about, the redistribution, if this kind of moved that ahead or if it's going to further delay it.
it will not further delay it. So by programming the reserve, the Walton Ferry project is not included in the proposed swap. We're just programming the reserve so that you all can obligate construction because there was an additional cost fee.
So we can go ahead.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. It's on our list for this fiscal year, so we're really pushing to have it obligated. And the conversations we've had with the state aid office, Lisa Dunn, who's kind of managing this, she has it slated for before the fiscal year to be
I don't
obligated.
remember exactly which one for the letting.
Yeah, so the letting is slightly different than the obligation, so it can be obligated, and let's say if it gets delayed a month, do some other thing, the funds are still obligated, so it can still move forward. So you can be obligated without having it let, but you can't let with it not being obligated. So
Still real close to whatever it was a couple of months ago. That we're looking at.
I think it might have pushed by for one letting. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, so there was your request. And we were, coordinating with Lisa and Maria from that office, in local programs. But it wasn't within our amendment cycle. It was right after the last amendment cycle, and it has to be amendment because we're programming unprogrammed STPG funds. And so that was the only delay, but that was just an administrative delay. It wasn't related to the August redistribution.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all very much.
Any additional questions for staff on these TIP amendments? I'm hearing none. I'll ask for a motion to endorse.
Moved.
Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes. We'll move on now to action item B, concurrence on federal functional classification changes. And Daniel, I believe you're going to do this one.
All right, thank you, Chair. So you all heard about this at our last meeting. So I'll reiterate a couple things and then I'll clarify exactly what we're recommending today. So just so you're aware, federal functional classification provides a framework for identifying the role that roadways play in moving vehicles. It informs roadway design and federal aid opportunities. We still have an ongoing call for revisions for our members. That includes locals as well as TDOT. That timeline is June through August. So that call for revisions is still open. So if you have changes, this is not at all. This is completely separate. What I'm going to present after this is completely separate. You still have time to send us any requests that you have for revisions and coordinate with us on that evaluation, as well as the October formal submission of those revisions by GNRC to TDOT, and then hopefully that revision by TDOT to FHWA by early 2025. So the revisions that we're talking about today are actually from a backlog from a previous year that we had not brought to this committee, as well as, sure.
I want to thank Deputy Commissioner Elliott for coming here today. And I want to say just in general, just going to the TPB meetings and our meetings and everything, I think for this meeting here today at the TCC, this is how it's supposed to work. I think everybody's had a great conversation. TDOT's coming in, the technical experts are kicking it around. We're all going to talk to the elected officials. I think it's working well, but also want to say just in general, TDOT, the last couple of years, the degree of engagement that you guys have had. It's always been a great relationship with TDOT, obviously, but the last couple of years, from the folks at the region coming to the TPB meetings and explaining everything, and you guys coming to these meetings and everything, it's really great. It's really, I think there's been some really, really great movement in that. So we thank you.
Sorry, Josh. No, you're fine. So these revisions are from a backlog that we just hadn't processed. They're not related to the upcoming revisions that we will be sending. So the two revisions, first one is essentially, well, both of them are basically just changing the functional classification to a local road and vice versa for two realignments of state routes. So the first one is Old State Route 109 between North Broadway and Magnolia Springs Road, changing that from a principal arterial to a local road, and then adding the new alignment of the State Route 109 from Magnolia Springs to I-65 as a principal arterial. And you can see that on the map. That's within the Sumner and Robertson counties. And then the second revision is Saturn Parkway. So Old State Route 47 at the Beechcroft Railroad grade crossing, realigning and removing that portion that is no longer in the new alignment, making that a local road, and then adding the new alignment as a minor arterial. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take those. But essentially the process is that our board has to concur on any functional classification changes for TDOT to then submit to Federal Highway for approval. And that we'll go through the same, we went through the same process with McEwen. We'll go through the same process with any requests for revisions from you all over the next couple of months.
Questions for staff on the functional classification changes? Okay, hearing none. Ask for a motion to endorse.
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Anybody opposed? Hearing none, that motion stands approved. That's the last of our action items. So now we'll move on to the item 5, the regular reports. First up is Federal Highway.
Hello, everyone. Zach Coleman. I am filling in for the normally scheduled guest, Melanie Murphy. She's on assignment. So I am a transportation planning specialist for Federal Highway Tennessee Division. No real major updates. Do want to let you know that the Reconnecting Communities pilot program just announced the FY24 NOFO, just released that. I believe it was this week. So that offers up $607 million for planning and capital construction and technical assistance. That's a new one this year. So it's really about improving access to daily needs such as jobs, healthcare, food, nature, recreation. It's a really good program. There's $457 million available for capital and $150 million available for planning grants nationwide. Also, just a quick update on urban area boundary adjustments. Working with TDOT on getting those finalized. We've had yours for a while, and everything looks good, but what we didn't know is that we have to submit everything all at once, including the small urban areas, adjusted boundaries to headquarters for review before we can go ahead and sign off on them. So we're almost there, and it should be a pretty quick turnaround. So expect that hopefully next month. That's it. That's all we got. Any questions?
Any questions?
Thank you.
Hearing none, thank you very much. Move on to B, TDOT report. Mr. Morrison.
You want to pull up are you able to pull up the one pager from the packet or everybody?
Well, it's in the
should have that?
packet. I don't have it in the slides.
Okay, that's fine. Everybody should have it in their packet. The statewide partnership program, just want to just have another discussion with you all on that. Hopefully it's very self-explanatory. This is our second round of the statewide partnership program. We learned a lot from the first round, and hopefully we've made some improvements in our process. Just want to emphasize that in the first round, it's still open to everyone, and everyone had the ability to enter their project request. Now we want to sort of funnel those more through the MPO. So we want y'all to have a conversation with us and the MPO as well, to be a part of that process, to make sure that the priorities of the MPO and yours are all the same, to get a project entered into the program that has the best opportunity for success, obviously. Again, it's projects that are currently not in the 10-year plan. You can obviously see the 10-year plan on our website with all the projects listed. You can see the projects that were part of the SPP last year. There was over 100 that were submitted. Those were pared down to 66 that were evaluated, and 6 projects were selected. There was 2 projects in Region 3. Really want to emphasize that it is a partnership. It also helps build our case to the legislature on what the needs are. And so if you have needs that are outside, again, not in the 10-year plan, it helps us present that to the legislature, like here are the greater needs. And I think last go around, we had an extra over 300 million in additional need. And we want to show that to the legislature. Obviously, that's how we try to get additional funding to do the projects, or to get more projects in the pipeline. Also, if you have the ability to again, it's a partnership, so to partner with additional local funds to get a project in there, again, that frees up other funds, kind of like we've talked about earlier with the swap. So we'll also be sharing the list of the projects with the MPO that were submitted last go around. It is an annual intake. And so if you submitted something last year and you feel like it's still a viable candidate, we suggest that you also enter that this year. Our hope is that there's something, obviously if things have changed, you have additional information to share with your proposal. We want to see that as well. We've improved the intake system as well. And we'll also share that with
with the MPO staff as well. So you can kind of, it's one of those intake systems where, you know, you got to kind of just make up stuff to see the whole thing, and that we understand that's a challenge. And so we'll actually share a PDF of that as well. So you can kind of prepare for what you're going to enter into the system. So, again, I don't want to kind of read through all of our one pager. It's multi pages, actually. There are some questions, but if you have additional questions, please, you can send those to either myself or through the MPO. And on the website, we're building additional, we've already gotten a few additional questions, so we're building on the FAQs. So we'll continue to build that on outside the static document and build those on the website as well. So hopefully answer some of your questions. So at this point, it's open until August 30th. So that does give you some time, but my suggestion is read through the information, absorb it best you can, and please let us know if you have questions. Again, work through the MPO staff to present that information if you have a project that you're wanting to propose for the partnership program. It's really high level overview, I know. So anybody have any questions on that? Yes.
You may have said this and I missed it, but my city administrator was under the impression that we have an Improve Act project that's not included in 10-year. We could add that to the tip and get this on the project. Is that correct? Did he understand that, or did I translate that correctly?
Can you say that again?
We have an
Improve Act project that's outside currently outside the 10-year plan.
If we get it on the tip, we can apply in this partnership program. Does that sound right?
Does it need to be on the tip before you can ask to be included in this? No.
Okay.
No. Again, if it's outside those already, again, you're trying to propose it to get it entered in. Again, we'll evaluate those annually and submit that list to the legislature to try to get additional funding for additional projects, as well as, you know, as we've talked about earlier, you know, the funding is continually changing as well. Hopefully we can enter in as many as possible. You know, a lot of people were saying, look, you only did 6, but you know, those 6, you know, it's a pretty big number there, those 6 that got in. And so getting new projects in there is obviously our goal. As funding is available, obviously we're still pay as you go. So it's a big part of it. A big part of getting the projects that you have done, though, is the discipline not to take too many new ones on too, though. Right. So, but I think this is good, though. Instead of the answer just being no, we're not asking for new projects or taking new projects. It gives everybody an avenue to ask, at least, you know. You got something to add, man?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to emphasize a little bit that, you know, this is supposed to be the partnership that we've been looking for. It's probably take the place of the priority asset we do year over year. But it doesn't have to be local money that you contribute to the partnership. It could be other forms of federal funds or things like that. It could also be like, you know, what Stacy was saying, it could be in a 10-year plan already, but it could be in an out year. But if you have an opportunity to contribute more, you might be able to accelerate that into a earlier year of the 10-year plan. So those are some of the new strategies that we wanted to emphasize. Again, this is not just about bringing local money to the table. It's the partnership between state dollars and local dollars, or locally managed dollars, I should say.
That's a good idea. Sir.
Thanks, Stacey. Are you imagining any kind of interface between this 10-year plan and the grants that you, TDOT, award, multimodal access, transportation alternatives, where those grants are awarded by TDOT internally, discretionary grants at the discretion of TDOT? Are you imagining interfacing that with this 10-year plan that would either increase or reduce your likelihood of winning because it is or isn't somewhere on this 10-year plan? How do you see that interface?
I'll let Stacy try it. I mean, I have.
Go ahead.
Okay.
So I was just going to say that
you can see
it can have impacts.
That the first bullet list on the eligible projects, you can see a lot of it's sort of emphasizing highway improvements, and that's because we have all of these discretionary grant options that can be used for the other multimodal projects. So you know, this, you need to think about how this is incorporated and related to the other grant programs that we provide. This is not a grant program. This is something that we need to emphasize as well, is that this is not intended. There is no ceiling. We do not know exactly where this is going to fall like we did with the previous year. This is just an opportunity, like Stacy said, is to find a ways that we can determine what is needed in the future beyond the years established in this year's or in these 10-year plans at this moment, and what we can do to work with legislature potentially to find other opportunities. You know, we got the $3.3 billion of the Modernization Act, but that was only 10% of what we were looking for as a total need. $30 billion is what we're still short on. So these are ways that we can develop that storyline to bring to the legislature and try to tell that story of what they can help us with in future years. So does that help, Robert?
No, I'm specifically saying there are grants that you decide the award of, discretionary grants. Some of them do fall on state roads, maybe highway safety, particularly when you think of multimodal access. And now you wish to set a partnership of prioritization. So therefore, how do you expect, like, what are you expecting your scoring, for example, of those grants?
Well, I think
to be influenced by this
sorry.
fact?
I thought I answered it the way that you were looking for, because the discretionary grants that I'm referring to, the multimodal, the improved transit, those are, it's their own entity. They're not, the partnership was not intended to assist in moving those grants forward. There's projects that we will get that have eligibilities with other discretionary grant eligibilities will probably not be evaluated at an SPP level.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's
okay.
okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Ms. Booker, I was saying 300 million is like the 30 billion was the need that was created through the last go around. So that's off.
An extra
That's
zero.
the three is all I had. The three's all.
Zeros.
It all runs together. I have a few zeros, yeah.
And just to be clear, so Steve was asked about how it's basically it was improved act or previous state commitment on a project that's no longer either the 10-year plan has been reprioritized, or if it's like state SVG that's on a project that wasn't part of the improved act, those type of projects that you could, because they're probably further along in project development if they maybe thought, hey, we're going to get construction funding, so we're all the way through design it right away. Those are the type of projects that'd be a good candidate to apply to this program.
Sure. Yes. And again, we do want to emphasize, that all projects are still there, still important, and we'll do them as funding becomes available. I mean, a couple of good examples of ones of those that are further out in the 10-year plan or beyond, and you do get a big federal discretionary grant to fund that project. Obviously, that creates an opportunity to the funding that we had accounted for that project already to be utilized on another project as well. So that's really the goal there. To answer that question. Other questions for Stacy? He's starting to get tired, I think. Nobody else. Thank you, Stacy. Do you have anything else for us? No, that's TAP. Did I mention TAP? I think I'm right into this. The TAP cycle is still open. My cheat sheet, that October, first week of October. So keep that in mind. I know a lot of your communities have utilized that. So keep that in mind too. Put your projects in there. Thank you, Stacy. Anybody else have anything for Stacy or anybody TDOT in general? No? All right, move on to the chair's report. I don't have anything other than to say that I'm hungry and ready for lunch. And we'll move on to the staff report.
All right, I'll speed through this, and I'll hand it over to Taylor real quick. I'll start just by introducing Andrew McIntyre, newest member of our staff on the MPO team. He'll be working with us on various projects, so welcome. The upcoming meetings, TPB next Wednesday, feel free to attend. It'll be a pretty similar agenda, almost exactly the same. We'll have Preston here again to present on the August redistribution, as well as the TIP amendments, the concurrence on functional class and other updates. Regional council bodies meeting on the August 21st at the downtown Nashville library, as well as September 17th is the Power of 10 Summit at the Music City Center. And then just quickly before I turn it over to Taylor, dues letters will be going out for MPO dues. I believe
This morning.
they were mailed this morning. So look out for those and communicate with your TPP representative on those as well. All right, Taylor, for the TIP status report.
Yeah, I won't hold you up too long. There's not a huge change from last month's, if you look at the percentages. The biggest thing I want to talk about is as we talked about earlier, all the funds are trying to get obligated for the end of the fiscal year. As you have that list, I'll be reaching out to y'all individually at an agency level, set up some times where we can actually just meet regularly before these projects for the end of the fiscal year, so we can iron out any issues preemptively. So just be prepared for that. Just maybe it'd be your desire to be weekly, bi-weekly. There's only, I guess, 2 months left essentially. So we'll have to meet at least a couple times. Just trying to go over and make sure that we're on pace to get these projects obligated. That's the big thing. Hopefully see those local obligations jump up for the next 2 months.
Yeah, the percentage will hopefully go from 2% to much higher before the end of the fiscal year. So, all right, that's all I've got.
Local program's gonna be involved in that conversation.
Yes, we've been talking with them pretty much every other day. So, yeah.
That was one question. Probably should ask that while we had everyone from PDOT here, but we still have 2 of our representatives here. With the change in local programs, and I know this is still in the process of happening, so you don't know that for sure, but is the goal to have experienced engineers up there? My fear is that we put entry-level engineers there who don't have that experience in the area, and they're just going by a checklist. That's my biggest fear in that area. And I would hate to see that happen. And I would rather see someone there who has the experience reviewing those kinds of projects, who has the experience actually implementing those kind of projects from the start to finish. It just doesn't have they've seen one little piece of it their whole career, and now they're trying to implement the whole process from a checklist.
Yes, so it's gonna be filled with mechanical engineers. No, and honestly, yes, there will be experienced engineers that are able to streamline the process with the knowledge that they bring to the table. It depends on what level, there is a hierarchy, but we need to make sure that we build with entry level engineers.
I understand that.
Yeah, they will be managed. The responsibilities will have the knowledge of delivery and what it takes to deliver.
And those groups are kind of coming together, the STID group and that group. And so those are included a lot of experienced folks, and I'm sure it'll all play out like you're saying.
And is Steve happy about this, or is Steve not happy about this? No comment necessary on that.
Yes.
We start worrying about,
Steve is wide open on it.
That's why you don't see Steve right now. He's busy.
Yeah, he's very committed, we'll say, right now. There's a lot going on.
He sees it as a challenge.
Yeah, he likes that, I think. I think if there's anybody at TDOT to put on the job, though, I think he's a get it done kind of guy, so. Yeah. All right, is there anything else on that? All right, any other business to come before the TCC today? Thank y'all for a very good meeting. I thought it was very good, but with that, we're adjourned.
Leave your name tags on the table.
Every time.